Hey Gramps, what were you private? Maybe specialist if you kissed enough ass. The voice shattered the low murmur of the Fort Bragg Chow Hall like a gunshot. First Lieutenant Brennan Chase stood at the entrance of the officers' section, his pressed ACU still crisp from the quartermaster, his West Point class ring catching the fluorescent lights overhead. 4 junior lieutenants flanked him, each wearing the same smirk of practiced arrogance. Frank McKenna didn't look up. He sat alone at a corner table, 71 years old, with hair cropped high and tight despite a decade of retirement. His civilian jacket was faded denim, his shoulders still square beneath the worn fabric. Before him sat a steel tray with meatloaf and mashed potatoes, untouched, in a thin booklet titled Memorial Ceremony Program, resting beside his coffee. Around his neck hung dog tags, old ones, the kind made of steel, not aluminum, scratched and tarnished. The chow hall smelled of institutional gravy and floor cleaner. 150 soldiers filled the space, a Monday lunch crowd of privates wolfing down food, NCOs trading war stories. Junior officers clustered in their designated section. The clatter of trays and silverware created a constant metallic rhythm until Chase spoke. Now that rhythm stuttered. Chase took 3 steps toward McKenna's table, his boots echoing on the linoleum. His entourage followed like pilot fish trailing a shark. You probably spent your whole career peeling potatoes in some fob kitchen. Right, old man? McKenna lifted his coffee cup, took a slow sip. His hands were spotted with age, but steady. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, silvered with time. He said nothing. If you've ever felt underestimated because of your age or experience, write "never give up" in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. This story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Chase pivoted toward his group, voice pitched loud enough to carry across 3 tables. Guys, check it out. This relic actually thinks he belongs here with real soldiers. The freckled lieutenant on his right snickered, a 23-year-old fresh from Ranger School with shiny boots and shinier ambitions. 2 tables over, a cluster of specialists stopped mid-conversation, forks hovering above their trays. Near the beverage station, a female staff sergeant with combat action badges covering her left sleeve glanced toward the commotion, her jaw tightening. But McKenna never stopped reading. His memorial booklet lay open, pages thin as whispers. Rodriguez, Miguel A. Staff Sergeant, 1968. Chen, Robert K. Corporal, 1969. Names typed in fading ink. Men who'd bled out in jungles half a world away. Men whose mothers had received folded flags and empty promises. His lips moved silently as he read, a private ritual performed in public space. Chase moved closer still, now standing directly beside the old man's table, looking down like a prosecutor addressing a defendant. Sir, I think someone needs to escort this civilian out. He's occupying table space reserved for actual commissioned officers. The word civilian dripped with venom, pronounced like an accusation of cowardice. Sergeant Major Rita Valdez started walking over, her stride measured but purposeful. She was 38, 3 Afghanistan deployments etched into the lines around her eyes, a career soldier who'd earned her rank through blood and competence. Something about the old man's absolute stillness made her curious, made her cautious. Is there a problem here, Lieutenant? Her voice carried the neutral professionalism of 20 years in uniform, but her gaze locked onto McKenna, cataloging details. The high and tight haircut on a man who should have let his hair grow out years ago, the perfect posture even while seated, spine straight as a rifle barrel. The dog tags, visible at his open collar, made of metal they hadn't issued since the 60s. Chase gestured dismissively toward McKenna. This gentleman appears confused about dining area protocols, Sergeant Major. I was about to direct him to the appropriate civilian section. McKenna finally looked up. His eyes were pale blue, washed out like old denim left too long in the sun, but they held something that made Chase's next words catch in his throat. The old man said nothing, just looked, held the gaze for 3 seconds. 5, 8, 10. The silence stretched like wire under tension. Chase's confident smirk flickered, just for a heartbeat, before he recovered and turned back to his audience with forced laughter. What's wrong, old-timer? Forget how to speak? Or did you never learn how to address real soldiers in the first place? But what Chase couldn't see were the dog tags around McKenna's neck. tags that weren't bought at any surplus store, tags that carried a name generals would recognize, a call sign that had become legend in the classified corners of military history. And in exactly 3 minutes, every person in this chow hall would learn what happens when you disrespect a ghost who refuses to stay dead. Chase was feeding off the attention now, voice rising with performative outrage. You know what this represents? This is stolen valor at its finest. Some guy throws on a jacket, hangs fake dog tags around his neck, maybe tells stories at the VFW about battles he never fought, and expects us to respect him. It's disgusting. Across the dining facility, tucked in a corner alcove reserved for field-grade officers, a 2-star general named Marcus Hastings set down his fork. He was 59, gray-haired, a combat veteran of 3 wars who'd learned to read rooms the way snipers read wind. That last word, disgusting, spoken with such self-righteous conviction, made him look up from his intelligence brief. Captain Josh Hammond, a ranger instructor seated near the condiment station, placed his water bottle down slowly. He was 36, built compact and dangerous, with a scar tracing from temple to jaw courtesy of Helmand Province. He'd heard stories during his years in special operations, whispered legends about operators from an era before night vision and drones. And something about those dog tags hanging at the old man's collar was triggering a memory he couldn't quite place. Steel tags, the old kind. MACV-SOG. The name hit him like a rifle report. McKenna returned his attention to the memorial booklet, turned another page with infinite care, his coffee cooling beside untouched food. The meatloaf was congealing on his tray, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Chase leaned down, placing one hand on McKenna's table for emphasis. His West Point ring clicked against the plastic surface. I asked you a direct question, old man. What was your rank? Or are you just another wannabe who bought that jacket at Goodwill and thought you'd play soldier for the day? The 6 specialists at the nearby table exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a 19-year-old from Alabama with barely 8 months in service, whispered to his battle buddy, "Man, this feels wrong." His friend nodded but stayed silent. They were junior enlisted. This was officer business, and you didn't insert yourself into officer business unless you wanted to find yourself pulling every shit detail on post for the next 6 months. Sergeant Major Valdez moved closer, her voice dropping to a lower register. "Lieutenant Chase, perhaps we should step back and—" Chase cut her off with a raised hand, not even granting her the courtesy of eye contact. "I've got this, Sergeant Major. I'm simply trying to establish whether this individual has any legitimate right to be sitting in the officers' dining section. Seems like a reasonable inquiry to me." McKenna's hands rested motionless on either side of his tray. His breathing remained slow and controlled, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The kind of breathing you learn when you're directing artillery fire while lying in mud with enemy soldiers close enough to hear their conversations. The kind of breathing that keeps you alive when survival depends on absolute stillness. Captain Hammond was standing now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Something was clicking into place in his memory. Old steel dog tags, MACV-SOG, the Studies and Observations Group, the most classified, most lethal unit in the Vietnam War. Operators who'd run missions so black they didn't officially exist. Men with call signs instead of names. Men who'd crossed borders into countries America had never officially entered. Men who'd called in airstrikes danger close. So close the shrapnel cut their own skin. Hammond's eyes went wide as recognition crashed over him like a wave. He took 4 fast steps toward McKenna's table, but Chase was still talking, oblivious, his voice swelling with righteous indignation. "You know what I think? I think this old man spent his entire career, if he even served at all, sitting behind some desk in an air-conditioned office, filing, paperwork, stamping forms, processing requests, and now he wants to sit here and pretend he's one of us. It's pathetic and it's insulting to everyone who actually wore the uniform with honor." The chow hall had gone almost completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their clattering and banging. 150 pairs of eyes were locked on the unfolding scene at the corner table, some faces showing discomfort, others showing morbid anticipation, a few showing dawning horror as pieces began falling into place. And through it all, Frank McKenna sat perfectly still, reading names of the dead like a priest reciting prayers. What's going on here? The question came from behind Chase, and he spun to find General Hastings standing there, 2 stars gleaming on his collar, his face carved from granite and authority. The general's voice wasn't raised, didn't need to be. It carried 3 decades of command presence. Chase snapped to attention, his swagger evaporating like water on summer asphalt. Sir, I was addressing a situation concerning an unauthorized civilian in the officers' dining area, sir. Hastings didn't look at Chase. His eyes were fixed on McKenna, specifically on the dog tags visible at his open collar. The general's face had gone very still, very pale, like a man seeing a ghost he'd thought was myth. Sergeant Major Valdez remained at attention, but her head tilted slightly as she tried to read the dog tags from her angle. The lettering was worn, barely legible, but she could make out fragments. Ghost, MACV-SOG, 1968. Her hand came up slowly, involuntarily, covering her mouth as the implications crashed through her brain. Holy shit, she whispered, and in the cathedral silence of the Chow Hall, that whisper carried like a shout. 3 nearby tables heard it clearly. The words spread through the room like ripples across still water. Heads turned, shoulders straightened, spines went rigid. Chase glanced at Valdez, confusion flickering across his features, then back at Hastings, then at McKenna. The old man still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just sat there like a monument carved from flesh and memory, reading his booklet of names. Captain Hammond reached the table, stopped 3 feet away, and his scarred face drained of all color. His right hand rose in a slow, deliberate salute, holding it there with parade ground precision. His eyes were glistening. The 6 specialists saw Hammond salute a civilian and immediately shot to their feet, chairs clattering backward across linoleum. They didn't understand what was happening, didn't know the significance, but when a Ranger captain salutes, you pay attention. They stood at attention, electricity crackling through their confusion. Sir, Chase said to the general, his voice uncertain now, stripped of its earlier confidence. I don't understand what's... Be quiet, Lieutenant. The general's words were soft, almost gentle, but they sliced through the air like a blade through silk. Chase's mouth snapped shut, with an audible click of teeth. Hastings took 1 step closer to McKenna's table, and when he spoke, his voice had changed, become younger somehow, filled with something approaching reverence. Colonel McKenna. McKenna finally looked up from his booklet. Those pale blue eyes met the general's gaze, and he gave the slightest nod. Nothing more. Just acknowledgement. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Colonel, the word detonated across the Chow Hall like a grenade. Officers at distant tables jerked upright. NCOs froze with food halfway to their mouths. The freckled lieutenant in Chase's group took an involuntary step backward, nearly tripping over his own boots. Chase's face cycled through expressions faster than thought. Confusion, realization, absolute terror. His skin went from flush pink to bone white in 2 seconds. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Hastings came to attention, his hand rising in salute. A 2-star general saluting a man in a faded denim jacket. It's an honor, sir. I studied your operations at the War College. Required reading for Special Operations Command. You're a living legend. McKenna's response came quiet and calm. The voice of a man who'd learned that volume meant nothing. I'm retired, General. Just here for tomorrow's memorial service. These were my men. He tapped the booklet with 1 weathered finger, the gesture tender. Valdez had moved closer, her eyes locked on the bottom tags now fully visible. She could read them clearly now. McKenna, F. Colonel. MACV-SOG, 1968, Ghost. Her father had served 2 tours in Vietnam, had come home with nightmares and a drinking problem and stories he'd told only once, late at night when he thought she was asleep. Stories about men who'd operated across the fence into Laos and Cambodia, places American troops officially never went. Men who'd carried no identification except call signs. Men who'd been disavowed if captured. Men who'd survived the impossible. And her father had mentioned one name, just once, Ghost McKenna, the man who'd survived 12 months of cross-border operations when the average life expectancy was 6 weeks. The man who'd been nominated for the Medal of Honor twice but couldn't receive it because his missions were classified above top secret. Jesus Christ, Valdez breathed. The ghost is real. McKenna glanced at her, and the faintest hint of a smile touched his weathered face. Your father was Valdez. Miguel Valdez, 1st Cavalry Division. She nodded, unable to speak, tears welling in her eyes. Good man. He saved my life in '69. Spotted an NVA observer I'd missed. Tell him Ghost says thank you. He passed, sir, 3 years ago, but he always said you were immortal, said nothing could kill Ghost McKenna. I'm sorry for your loss, Sergeant Major. He was a fine soldier and a good friend. The words were simple, but they carried decades of blood and mud and survival. McKenna slowly pushed back his chair. The scrape of metal on linoleum was the only sound in the universe. He stood, movements deliberate, and reached for the pontex around his neck. He lifted them over his head, held them for one long moment in his spotted hand, then let them drop onto his steel tray. The clank of metal on metal rang through the chow hall like a church bell, like a judgment pronounced. He turned to face Chase directly. The young lieutenant looked like he might vomit or faint or both. His West Point ring, which had seemed so impressive 10 minutes ago, now looked like a child's toy. McKenna's voice, when he finally spoke to Chase, was not loud, but every syllable cut through the silence with surgical precision. Colonel, United States Army, MACV-SOG. When you were learning your ABCs in kindergarten, Lieutenant, I was calling airstrikes 10 clicks inside Laos with a price on my head. 3 silver stars, 2 purple hearts, 12 months running operations. Your clearance level isn't high enough to read about. Now here's the question you need to ask yourself. When you look at someone who's lived longer, fought harder, and sacrificed more than you can possibly comprehend, do you see someone to mock, or do you see someone to learn from? Because in about 20 seconds, everyone in this room is going to learn the most expensive lesson in respect ever taught at Fort Bragg. The words landed like physical blows. Chase actually staggered backward, his face the color of old newspaper, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. One of his junior officers, the stocky one with the fresh Ranger tab, took a deliberate step away, distancing himself from the blast radius. General Hastings moved to stand beside McKenna, facing Chase, his face absolutely unforgiving. Lieutenant Chase, you have just publicly humiliated one of the most decorated soldiers in United States Army history. A man who killed more enemy combatants before his 25th birthday than you and your entire West Point class will encounter in your combined careers. A man whose classified operations saved hundreds of American lives. You are hereby relieved of your current assignment, effective immediately. You will report to my office at 1400 hours to receive formal charges under UCMJ, Article 89, disrespect toward a superior commissioned officer. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Chase whispered, barely audible. I can't hear you, Lieutenant. Yes, sir, Chase's voice cracked on the second word. 2 military police officers appeared from somewhere, moving through the crowd with the instinct that comes from years of sensing disaster. They flanked Chase silently. Escort the lieutenant to holding, Hastings said. He'll remain there until his hearing. The MPs took Chase's arms. He didn't resist. Couldn't. He looked back once at McKenna, his face a portrait of absolute devastation. McKenna met his gaze with those pale blue eyes. No anger, no satisfaction. Just the calm assessment of a man who'd faced worse enemies than in one. Arrogant lieutenant having the worst day of his life. They led Chase toward the exit, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. 150 soldiers created a corridor of silent judgment. Not a single word spoken, just the sound of boots on linoleum and Chase's ragged breathing. When the doors swung shut behind them, Captain Hammond strode forward, still holding his salute. Sir, it is the greatest honor of my career to meet you. I teach your operations in my Ranger course. The Laos extraction, the fire-based Kate defense, the Cambodian bridge demolition. You're the reason I joined Special Forces. McKenna smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face. Then you're a braver man than I was, Captain. I joined because I was too stupid to know better. Warm laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension like a fever. The 6 specialists approached hesitantly, the youngest clearing his throat. Sir, would it be possible to get a photo with you? McKenna looked at them, really looked, saw himself 50 years ago, skinny and scared and desperate to prove something. Of course, but promise me something. Don't be in such a hurry to prove you're tough. The real warriors are the ones who come home and take care of their families. That's the hardest mission there is. Remember that. Yes, sir. They clustered around him, phones emerging, smiles splitting their faces. When McKenna finished and prepared to leave, something happened. One soldier stood, then another, then 10, 20, 50. Within seconds, every soldier in the chow hall was on their feet at attention. No one had ordered it. No sergeant had barked a command. They simply stood, a spontaneous tribute to a man whose wars they'd never fought, but whose service they recognized as sacred. McKenna paused at the door, turned, looked at them, 150 soldiers standing in silence. He brought his hand up in a slow salute, held it, then dropped it, and walked out into the North Carolina afternoon. Sergeant Major Valdez spoke, her voice carrying across the room. That is what a real soldier looks like. Remember this day. Remember his name. Colonel Frank McKenna. Ghost. Because men like him are the reason we're free to sit here in peace. Age doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. Experience doesn't make you obsolete, it makes you invaluable. What did you think of this story? Share your thoughts below and hit subscribe because the next one is even more powerful.